Hello, year 11 or year 12 or whatever it is you want to call yourselves at the moment. I hope you're well. In the last video that I uploaded, the short clip, the introduction, I mentioned coronavirus and globalization and how to understand its spread. The spread of this virus is really to understand globalization. Last year, we talked a lot about globalization and how it is a process of social and economic change where the world has become increasingly interconnected as a result of the three T's, if you remember that: trade, technology, and transport. But the things that have been driving this have been the increasing flows of people, goods, and money. So trade, technology, and transport as a result of increasing flows of people, goods, and money. And it's the bit about people that is so relevant to what is happening in the world at the moment. So what I've got for you is just a series of maps that tell stories. And it's important that you understand that there's geography right there in front of us in what is happening in the world at the moment. And I hope you find this interesting. So this is the Silk Road. Now the Silk Road wasn't just one road really, it was a series of trading routes from east to west, from Asia to Europe in the medieval times. You'll note that at the bottom of the screen here it mentions from BC, 120 years BC roughly, to 1450 AD. So this was the medieval period until the period of European colonialism. Okay, in fact, the center of world economic power in the medieval times was not in fact Europe, it was really Indo-China, by which we mean India and China. Okay, so this is where most of the trade, most of the goods that were traded came from, and some also went back the other way. And this is important. There was also a sort of sea route that went south of the Arabian Peninsula here, and then you also have the trading route south of India, but the majority of it was over land. So here we now see the spread of the Bubonic Plague, the Black Death plague that we learnt about in history at some point, that affected London in 1348. Okay, it originated somewhere in East Asia. It originated somewhere in East Asia, whether it was what used to be called Burma or whether it was some part of the Yuan dynasty in China. It certainly originated, we think it originated somewhere in East Asia. And what you can see here is how it more or less matches up perfectly with the Silk Road. The spread of the Bubonic Plague spread from east to west along these trading routes, because of course that's where people were traveling, that's where traders were moving and migrating over these years. The third map here shows the two things together. So we've now got the Silk Road in red, and then we've also got areas of the outbreak of Black Death. So we can see that in these provinces in China there was an outbreak of Black Death. We've also got areas in India, and we've got areas in Central Asia and what is now known as Turkey, and then of course we've got Europe itself. If the previous three maps looked at the spread of plague over space and distance across the Silk Road, this map looks at the spread of the plague over time. Now hopefully you will have noticed that on this choropleth map we have years listed up in the top right. What fascinates me about this map is that it shows just Europe, and then obviously down here we've got parts of North Africa, and then here we've got parts of Central Asia, but by and large it shows just Europe. And it took as much as 3 years to spread around the entirety of the continent. Just think about that for a moment, and think about how long coronavirus has been with us, certainly in Europe. It's about 3 months since it emerged in China. And in fact, in 3 months, it's pretty much spread around the world. So this tells you something about globalization, which is a modern process, and the speed at which trade and transport and the movement and flow of people happen. So to coronavirus now. What we've got here is a great map that shows where the connections made by Facebook users are happening. And this tells us a lot about the globalization of technology. I'm just going to annotate this so you can get a sense of the patterns that have been emerging. So we believe that coronavirus originated in kind of central China, about here, somewhere here. It then spread to parts of the Koreas. So certainly we know it spread to South Korea. Then strangely it spread to Iran. And then we ended up with a big outbreak in northern Italy there. From there it spread to France, spread to Spain, the UK, and around the same time it was spreading to the UK, it spread to New York. Then it was spreading in California. And what these places, look, you have to exclude China for the moment, for the time being, but these places, what they all have in common is that they are developed nations within the core. But if you're watching the news lately, you'll see that the next area of real acceleration in infections and cases are places like this. Brazil, the East Coast. We've got places like Rio and Sao Paulo. We've got Mumbai in India. There was some spread before, but it's now really accelerating there. We've also got South Africa. And these countries, what they all have in common is that they are what we call, according to Franks's model, they are in the semi-periphery. And these countries are all emerging economies. So you have to ask yourself, where is coronavirus going to be spreading now? Well, you know, it started off in the core. Now it's moving to the semi-periphery, the emerging economies in the semi-periphery. Next, well, I imagine it's going to start spreading to the periphery, to the developing countries, the Congo, countries in Central Asia, some countries in South America, maybe even countries in the Sahel region. Now these countries, of course, are the periphery, and we're talking about the least developed economies. We're talking about the developing economies. Now I suppose even though their healthcare systems are not as developed as those in the developed world, what they've got is the benefit of time. They have time to plan in a way that the developed countries, well, some developed countries had time to plan, but because of the speed of these global connections, many developed countries were taken by surprise by this. So you would hope that once we gain enough information about the virus, the periphery countries, the developing countries, will have enough information and education to be able to plan and prepare well for it. We hope, of course. So I think what made the Facebook connections map particularly interesting is that it's like a modern day Silk Road, and it's interesting to look at, you know, because if you were a government in charge of trying to slow down or stop the spread of coronavirus, what would you do? Well, you look at that map and you think, well, okay, the global hubs, the highly connected global hubs, the cities, New York, Milan, London, Paris, Hong Kong, these places are kind of the, you know, the hubs where coronavirus is spreading from due to business travel and tourism. So what do? Do you close the airport to business travelers, to tourists? Do you close it to all trade? Well, that's not sustainable economically. People need to eat. We import so much of our food here in the UK. And this is where the debate happens about how far do you go to protect lives in damaging the economy with the cost of millions, thousands, maybe even millions of jobs? And this is where the debate is at the moment in pretty much every country in the world. What is interesting is that conflict between the economy and health is raging everywhere. But generally speaking, the countries that acted fastest and were most decisive in closing down airports and trying to slow the spread of the disease tend to have saved more lives and in fact save more jobs. So it's definitely worth something to think about.